The first thing I want to talk about is the recent eclipse that happened. I think it was either last Saturday or maybe it's this Saturday.
No, it was last Saturday.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Anything of significance on that?
Oh, yeah. My God, I guess. Not only was that eclipse significant, I think the biggest thing that eclipse did was it was a full moon partial eclipse, which answered a total eclipse, which happened on the 14th of October. See, eclipses always happen 2 weeks apart, approximately. You can only get a new moon eclipse or a full moon eclipse, right? It's the only time eclipses can happen. And when the sun and the moon and the earth align, you get eclipses. And yeah, eclipses are definitely very, very powerful. So the new moon eclipse, which happened on the 14th, was exceedingly powerful. It striped right across the southwest of the United States and had a lot of power. Now, what's interesting about that is that I'm just looking this up here right now. When was that? Yeah, that was actually on October 14th was the new moon eclipse, which was huge. It was actually a total eclipse, and you could only see it if you were in the southwest of the country and up through, like Washington and Oregon and such, and also down here in Southern California. So that was answered by the last eclipse that we just had, which was on the 28th, October 28th, which was last Saturday. So yes, and why that was so significant is in between the 14th and the 28th and all this that happened, we saw the whole situation in Israel really start to mount. And of course, we know what happened October 7th in Israel. And this really exacerbated. Oftentimes, eclipses manifest themselves slightly before, which this one did. And the 28th eclipse was, again, on the full moon. And that is precisely when Israel was starting the ground war in Gaza. And that I actually, on my podcast, if anybody's listening to my podcast, you go to Jeff Harmon Astrologer or Jeff Harmon Vedic Astrologer. We identified that eclipse, while the moon was full during the eclipse, was passing right over Israel. And of course, Lebanon and the whole Middle East actually got really strong right over about Iraq, and then just went right out into the Mediterranean during that whole time. And eclipses have always been known to be an omen. And this particular one was something called a serocycle. Seven South. And these start at the north and south poles. And Seven South, as I mentioned in our podcast, actually began in the year 1248. And they start at the south or north poles. This one started at the south pole and went all the way, serpentining around, of course, is hitting just now, right now, this October. And really has a sense of violence. That's what it means. It is an eclipse that brings sudden fits of anger, explosions, and intensities with people. And I think that's pretty fitting to what we're seeing right now with this whole eruption between Israel and the Palestinian people and Hamas and Hezbollah and all that, and Iran. And it's interesting how accurate the astrology often mirrors events on Earth. So this is a trigger point, and not to sound conspiratorial, I personally believe the same bankers who fund both sides of most wars are probably on both sides of this one. I mean, if you look at the transparency of what's going on here, Iran has been allowed to start pumping oil like crazy again. China's buying it out the back door and the front door. And you've got, all these different streams of income now supplying the terrorist organizations that are surrounding Israel. And you're getting other countries rumbling they're going to declare war against Israel. You've got Turkey moving battle groups in. Of course, we've moved battle groups in. So look at what's happening. But eclipses don't happen in isolation. And one of the things I also mentioned on our podcast is that the country of Israel, which was formed in 1948, I actually took the birth chart and I was showing how literally there is a progressed Pluto, it's called solar arc progressions, squaring the Israeli moon. And over the next 2 years, we have a progression of Mars squaring Pluto. Now, people might say, okay, great. What the heck does that mean, right? violence and trouble.
And
So-
this relates to the Pluto return that you were talking about.
It's a number of things, yeah. The
Yeah.
Pluto return is certainly one of the big ones. In astrology here, I'll show you. This is kind of interesting to see. I'll share the screen here. And what you'll see here is when I get over to that screen, astrologers like to take the birth time of a nation. Well, it's pretty ubiquitous that everyone says the United States, its birth chart was on July 4th of 1776, when the founding fathers made a declaration of independence and signed it. And there's dispute between astrologers as to which time they actually did it. There is a chart that I use called the Sibley chart. It's named after a man who was called Ebenezer Sibley, hence its nickname, the Sibley chart. And that one I have found to be pretty accurate. And what I'm about to show you wouldn't matter if they signed it at noon or if they signed it at 5:10 p.m., which is the time that they're using for the Sibley chart. So one of the things, this is, you can see right here, this is the United States birth chart on the inner circle. And what that means in plain English is that is the birth chart at the time the Declaration of Independence was begun to be signed at 5:10 p.m. And Sibley said that the church bells started ringing about 5:10 p.m. and everyone was running around saying, hey, they're signing it. So I go by that time. Well, here's what's most important. You can actually see here Pluto in the outer wheel right now is what we call transits. And we can actually see Pluto is returning to the birth chart of the United States. So plain English is that's called the Pluto return. And astrologers use those types of terms for a return. Just like in a person's chart, they have Saturn returns at least twice in their life. Many people have them 3 times if you live to be in your 80s. The difference with Pluto is it only happens somewhere between 245 and 250 years. So none of us are going to live that long, right? And if anybody does, give me a call. I want to know what you're eating for breakfast. But 250 years is a long time. And just to give you an example of how important and how much this has been shown throughout history to be pretty doggone accurate, is the Roman Empire dissolved on a Pluto return. Many historians will go back and say nations tend to fall or rise again at 250 years. And I don't think, we need a brick to fall on our heads to know when you look at what's been going on with the United States for the last 2.5, 3 years, it has been tragic what's happening. I mean, we're 33 trillion in debt. And there's a little trivia for you. I always love to bring this up. When you're 40 years old, you are just a little over 1 billion seconds old. And anybody can do this. Take a calculator, take 60 seconds, multiplied times 60, you get the amount of seconds per hour. Multiply that times 24, and that times 365. Even though that's general, and I know there's leap years and all that, you'll get a feel that you're a little over 1 billion seconds old at 40 years. Multiply that times 40. Well, I did a little math experiment. Do you know what 1 trillion seconds is? Take a guess.
Oh, I think it's like 10,000 years or something.
It's 11,700 and something odd years. It's staggering. And these guys are handing out $1 billion bills like they're $100 bills. I mean, look at, to do a trade swap with Iran for $6 billion for prisoners, $6 billion. I mean, that's giving them a pat on the back and saying, go get them, boys. I mean, even though I know they're all standing in front of the high-def cameras and tell us all that, yeah, but it's only for humanitarian purposes and medical, it emboldens the regime. And the regime is now got all these other resources that have opened up to them, including their ability to now make nuclear weapons. So that's where we're at right now. They want to get World War III going, and their last cog in the wheel, the last spoke that they got to take out before it all collapses, is a place you may have heard of called the United States of America. And if they are successful at it and destroy this country and its infrastructure, they could potentially get their new one world order in and put their microchips on everybody's forehead or in their bloodstream if they want. And we're in big trouble. And by the way, before I get off this chart, the Pluto return is either destruction or it's the phoenix rising out of the ashes. And here's a better way to show you. Watch, if this is something known as a graphic ephemeris, and I'm going to use something called precession correction, because if you don't, the United States is, again, 240 something years old. Let me just put this graph up here. So you can actually see here the Pluto return will actually start right here this February of 2024, comes back again in July of 2024. You can see the dates right there. And the final hurrah is right at the end of 2025. Plus, we have something going on that's also exceedingly dangerous and deceptive, and that is the Neptune is opposing Neptune right here. You can actually see the dates that this is happening. And of course, it finishes up this February. This happened right before the Civil War, believe it or not. And that was kind of interesting because it's a very deceptive energy. The one that is most concerning, and this is easier shown on a wheel for the United States, and this is something I've been talking a lot about on podcasts and also on different shows. And this is something known as solar arc directions. You can see that right there. Now, when I say okay, notice the outer wheel changes. And again, just FYI, you can even zoom in on this. This is the birth chart of the United States. Well, this outer wheel is something that astrologers use called solar arcs. And if you eyeball every single planet in the United States birth chart has moved exactly 247.5 degrees. Why? Because the United States is that old. July 4th, we turned 247 years old. So it's not quite 6 months, but it's about that. So it's 247 degrees. It's moved because that's how old the United States is. And this Mars is going to conjunct the United States moon here where I'm circling. Look at this. You can see it right over here. 0A04. That means 0 degrees. A is approaching 4 minutes of arc. Plain English, that will go to 0 degrees right at the end of November. That is right around November 28th. Now, give or take either side of that, something's likely to happen. This is very dangerous. The United States has never experienced this before, and I can tell you when it does, it gets very, very volatile. And we also next year have a Saturn by progression going over the top of the United States Mars. And these are aspects of violence, war, riots, trouble, pandemics, you name it. They'll throw anything at us. And I hate to say this, but you're dealing with people that have zero regard for life. One of the things that I want to say on a positive note is the United States really, truly, I think, was founded not only on sacred principles, but divine ones. And that is, there's a lot of lore that the founding forefathers of this country were very much into the occult, masonry, etc. In fact, George Washington, you can see here in this mural, literally, he laid the cornerstone of the foundation in a ritual, a Masonic ritual at a good astrological time. You can see the man back here is lowering the cornerstone of the foundation with a block and tackle down into the ground right there. And you can see Washington has his Masonic apron on, and this was a big ceremony. You can see the man back here with the book, making a big ceremony at a good astrological time when they laid that cornerstone of the foundation. And it's my opinion they did the same thing with the astrology at the time they signed the Declaration of Independence. So there's a lot of secrets to astrology. And I think it was Benjamin Franklin who said that literally no one would do anything majorly important that had an impact on the unfoldment in the future that wasn't taking into account good astrological times. And again, it's known as electional astrology. So even though I think we're really in probably some of the most trying times by far that this country's ever seen, I also have hope. And it's interesting, this morning I was just doing a session with a psychic friend and client of mine who is a wonderful psychic. And I get the same thing from different psychics that the astrology gets. And that is, yes, this is going to be a really trying time. But in the end, I think the sacred angels that were really put in place when this country was formed might just save us. And I always say the divinity is above the lower forces. One of my favorite diagrams to show. So this diagram is really interesting because, I love to show this diagram a lot. Whatever your belief in divinity, God, whatever, it certainly seems to be far above creation. And they say our souls are created somewhere right about here. And this is an Aramaic Hebrew word that means absolute, which means where the divine emanation of souls are created. And this is the hierarchy of angels that's believed to rule these very high sacred dimensions. They claim there's 49 dimensions and 49 subdimensions up here. It's exceedingly vast. The next worlds down, Braya, is where the waters of creation and other spiritual worlds are believed to be that get denser. And these are the angels that rule that. Again, 49 dimensions and 49 subdimensions are believed to be here. The next world down, many people listening who are familiar with the so-called Kabbalah, which is really just a word that means ancient sacred knowledge, but we'll just call it ancient sacred knowledge because, again, the Kabbalah has been so popularized. There's a book called the Sefer Yetzirah. Yetzirah is a word that actually means formation. This is where the rotating galaxies are believed to be. This is where the molecular structures and densities of creation really form, hence why it's called formation. And they claim there could be 49 parallel universes and 49 subdimensions within them. And there may be a lot of truth to that. We've heard stories about the Pegasus program, which was what the government had going based off of Tesla's work. We also hear about the Philadelphia experiments, remote viewing, and all kinds of things like that. In fact, I've had a lot of clients who are involved in that, and I've been involved in it myself with remote viewing, and it's profound stuff, and it's real. And that is Einstein's theory of relativity, and also Tesla's, I might add, that dimensions are stacked on top of one another and that there really is no time. It's all happening quite potentially at what we might call at once. Or time is a construct that's based on the astronomy of the Earth. So anyways, long story short, the last worlds down is the astral planes. And of course, you could see here's Earth and here's us in these meat suits called bodies. And what's interesting is we always hear these stories, like the Garden of Eden story, but it's also extant in the Vedantic, the Sanskrit, and many other, you could say, religious doctrines of the past where there was this war in heaven and the spirits were cast down. We hear this in the book of Enoch and, the Watchers and the Nephilim and etc. Well, these lower, of course, in the West, we call them, usually you get a guy with a suit tie and a microphone telling you about the devil, right? But it's just a little bit deeper than that. They say these 4 were cast down. And beneath that, there's 8 sub-princes and legions upon legions upon legions beneath that. And this story may get a lot deeper than we'll ever know, certainly deeper than I'll ever know. And one thing I'll tell you is that the evil spirits may be imprisoned right down into the fabric of the molecular structures of this universe and deeper. In science and in physics and quantum physics, we all talk about, atoms and molecules and neutrinos and all these different things that build up the physical world. But I think it goes even way deeper than that. When you start getting into string theory and you start looking at spiritual forces, which absolutely cannot be measured at this time, like hard sciences likes to do. These are forces of the soul, the spirit, the psyche, and of angels and spirits and intelligences and demonic forces, which are way outside of what I think hard sciences can fully wrap themselves around. Well, that's where I think these guys are embedded. And I think as a result, evil is a part, at least, of this dimension at this time. And good and evil have always been at war and evil causes a hell of a lot of trouble, no pun intended, but it never wins. We see the horrible stuff that has happened on this planet throughout history, the horrible crimes that have been committed against innocent people through wars and various different things, and yet creation continues on. It's never fully destroyed. And I think ever since 2020, we've been at that crossroads where the demonics, or the possessed people who work with the demonics, literally knew this was a window of time when the world was changing. Not only did we have COVID, but we had a Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which is exceedingly powerful. This is why, evil is really pushing its envelope right now. But will it win? That's the thing. Will it win? I say, if I'm correct, and some of the psychics that I've have as friends and clients, I say no, not in the end. They never will. They never can. And they're incarcerated. And I think we need to be strong. We're going to see some crazy stuff happen here this next year and a half. But we just might be the phoenix rising out of the ashes. And that's actually the meaning of Pluto. When you look at Pluto itself, all the glyphs of the planets are very sacred. They come from the seed, which is the sun, the moon, which is the crucible, and the cross, which is where spirit manifests on this physical plane. See, the sun in Naadi and Vedic astrology is what they say, where time and space actually unfolds itself. And the moon is where the seed of creation gets contained or concretized, just like dad puts the seed in mom's womb, farmer puts the seed in the ground, you see. And then spirit becomes manifest on the cross, which is the physical plane. You can actually see this right here. See that the cross is not only sunrise, noon, sunset, and midnight, but it represents the four archangels of the building blocks of the fabric of this creation. And scientists laugh at this because, Archangel Michael rules kinetics and fire and forces. Michael is that. And of course, Gabriel is water, fluids, you see. And then you have Raphael, which is air, gases, all that type of stuff. And then you have Uriel, which is the solidification of material objects. So those are the four archangels. And even though science laughs at them, when you break them down in the atomic tables, they fit perfectly. And any scientist who has an IQ above room temperature will tell you really fast that something very intelligent is holding this whole fabric of creation together. Even if you break it down into molecules and neutrinos and all this stuff, it's still held in very specific states. It's very magical when you think about how this world truly is and creation itself. It's quite amazing. AI will never do what we do, and that is feel and have emotions and have free will. They can be programmed to act like it, but they're never going to have it. You're a living human being with a spirit, a psyche, and a soul with, all of this amazing free will. Even though the world's tough, it's quite magical. You look at you go kick your car once and see if it heals. You do, so it's really amazing what creation is. And this is why I think the forces of destruction and the demonics will never win, even though they cause a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I have a theory that the universe is structured in such a way that anything that sort of goes against oneness or unity ultimately can't succeed because it's based in separation. And if everything comes from the same place, then it's technically a lie. So it's going towards something that can't even be possible. So people who are, or entities who are evil, are sort of working against the actual fabric of reality that they exist inside of, something like that. I don't know, but it's really interesting to hear that from the ancient wisdom, not Kabbalah's perspective that you were talking about. It's actually really laid out well in the Naadi astrology as well. See, Vedic astrology is kind of a pop term. I'll put that on the screen too. A lot of people have heard of Vedic astrology, and that's, again, a bit of a pop term. When you look at what does it really mean? Well, let me put this up here if I can find it here. Where the heck did it go? There we go. See, Vedic here. Let me get to that right slide here.
Vedic astrology, as you can see here, is kind of a pop term. In fact, a friend of mine who passed away, Chakrapani, is probably the guy who coined that phrase back in the 60s. And what it means is it comes from the Vedas. The Vedas are very, very ancient scriptures. Now, a lot of modern scholars balk at this. They say, oh, it's only been, 900 to 1,000 years old. And yet we have documents that actually prove that there was a man named Krishna who talked about it 3000 BC, before the Vedas were ever supposed to even be created, that were mentioned. So there's a lot of mystery to the ancient East. And I can tell you, India is certainly a place where one of them is. And there's something, the real name of Vedic, quote unquote, astrology is actually called Jyotisha. Jyotisha is a strange word that means the science of the light of the soul. And you can see that's right here. And you could see this white etheric energy that leaves death to rebirth, and of course, on and on and on over the hills. And this is a picture out of the Bhagavad Gita. And what's interesting is this is stuff science cannot measure. And the ancient Vedic astrologers, or Jyotishas, were really what they called Naadi Jyotishas. And Naadi is a strange word. You can see it right here. It's spelled a couple of different ways. I used a double A. Some people use a single A. But it means to get to the root of. Naadi is a strange word that means to get to the source, to get to the divinity of source. So the astrology was understood not to be us. Modern astrology runs around and say, oh, you're a Pisces, you're an Aries, you're this. That's a bunch of love, light, and cluelessness. The love and light's fine. It's the cluelessness that doesn't work. And they knew prior to the 1700s, no one ran around calling you your sun sign. This stuff all came in the spiritualist movement in the 1800s, and definitely in the 1900s, in the 60s, the whole Hollywood, thing on astrology and Linda Goodman and all that. That's really where that came in. It's pop astrology. The old stuff said, no, we are spiritual beings having a physical experience. And the planets might just be like portals where the spiritual interconnectedness of the soul is connected to. So this matrix called astrology interacts with you, me, and everyone else completely uniquely. Why? Because it's the time your soul was tied to the body. I always love to tell the story that literally, they say the soul is attached to the embryo at conception, not at birth. They say the angel literally ties the spirit, psyche, and soul by silver cord to the embryo at conception in the mother's womb. And there's a spiritual connection here where it's now empowered to take place, where spirit is now being created, a space where it can happen and be contained. That's what the moon does. It's containment of spiritual energy. And they say that guardian angel waits until the celestial alignments are right. Now, of course, down here on Earth, mom's busy getting bigger, right? And having all the stuff she goes through with pregnancy. And it's a lot. And I know, I watched my son being born. And what's interesting is that they say right when the child is exiting the womb, by whatever method, C-section, regular, that angel waits and ties the spirit, psyche, and soul permanently to the body at first breath. And that's when the spirit is imbued. And all the mechanics of time then begin on that soul. And we know there is no time, right? I mean, if you really look at what the heck is time, time's an illusion. Not that it is. I mean, we all sit here on Earth paying our bills. I always say, call me on the first of the month to tell me if time's an illusion. It's real. But on the other hand, it's true, because when you look at when a person passes away, they don't take anything with them. They don't take any money with them. They don't take their favorite rings. They don't take all their heirlooms or whatever. It stays right here. And the attorneys and the relatives get to fight over it, right? So hopefully not, but that's usually the way it goes. But the bottom line is it's a celestial astronomical phenomena. Every day the earth rotates, and even if you're a flat earther, it still cycles, right? And the bottom line is the moon goes around the earth about every 27 and a half days, 28 and a half to catch up. So time is a relative thing to the astronomical mechanics. And if you took us out of that, it would totally disappear. Let's say we went to a different realm. or you lived in space or whatever, you would not have time as we know it. So time is a total earth-based thing, and it's only existent to us as spiritual beings during these lifetimes, when we're born to when we pass out of the body. And, the earth is not an easy place. I mean, all of us have found it's not easy to live here. We all go through our trials and tribulations, and it's stunning how accurate the astrology is. I mean, I've done so many readings over the years, including myself. I'm just amazed at how accurately the astrology shows specifically the timing points of when energies shift. Stunning. For good and for ill, or all points in between. They're literally portals that interact upon the soul. And I'll tell you another thing that's quite stunning is the location astrology. See, location astrology literally is looking at what do you have where you live, and everybody's different. So you can see here, this is location astrology, and I just picked today's time here. And each person will have different energies throughout the globe. We all will have a different set of energies. And it's really commensurate with the energy print that your soul was imbued on the first time we drew first breath. And then you have what we call transits and progressions over the top of that. You can actually see, I can animate these, see things moving. So we're all going to have transits and progressions throughout our lives that will drastically change. And it's so accurate. It's creepy when you really follow it. If the birth time is accurate, it's stunning how much it shows cycles and changes throughout the life. And again, if you change to different localities, like people move to Europe, or they'll move to South America or Australia or the Southeast Asia or wherever they end up going, you will definitely alter your life drastically. So it's quite amazing.
Would somebody feel drawn to a certain geographic location because of this astrology? Is that possible?
Well, yeah. I mean, see, what's interesting is people always say to me, where's the best place to live? And I always go, well, there's a lot of flavors on the menu besides good and bad, best and worst. See, and this is what's so amazing about location astrology, which I do a lot in readings. This is how you have to view it. If people go to sun lines, their health and their vitality picks up. If they go to Jupiter lines, they're going to feel much more spiritual and uplifted and happy and vivacious. If they go to Venus lines, pleasures, money, opulence, all that type of stuff. If they move on more challenging lines, which is like Saturn lines, they're going to feel more structured. They're going to feel more discipline or having to work harder to get what they get. If they go on Pluto lines, they're going to feel like their life is always in a noir. It's crazy. Definitely like a noir. If they go on Neptune lines, they either get super spiritual or they get really confused. See, so I've actually had doctors say, geez, where's a good place to go to improve my health? I've tried everything I can in the allopathic and Ayurvedic world. And I always say, go to sun lines. Sun lines heal you. They make you feel better. And I've actually had scientific proof. I've had doctors tell me their PSAs would drop out of the sky. I've had clients tell me, wow, I feel better. My arthritis is subsiding, or my cancer's in remission, or whatever it was. And, or ailments that were there subsided greatly. So it depends. In location astrology, you have just about every flavor in the human mind you can find on location astrology. All these horizontal lines equal what we call latitude crossings, and yours are going to be different than mine or anyone else's. And what's interesting is they put the combination of two planets together, and they only have about a 30-mile north and south influence. Some astrologers say 60, but I find 30 is when they really weaken. And these work just like what we call the inverse square law in physics. The closer you get to them, the more powerful they are, and the farther away you get, the weaker. It's just like light and sound. I always use the analogy, if you get right on one of these lines, it's like going to a concert and standing in front of the band with your pant legs vibrating. And again, The good guys are always Sun, Jupiter, and Venus. Neptune can bring confusion. Moon is emotional. See, so you really get specific. See, like here you can see, I'm just using a mock chart. That's a Mars-Pluto line that just happens for this chart to be right above Phoenix, Arizona. Mars and Pluto, extremely volatile. That's like flipping matches over an open can of gasoline. I've actually seen people get in fistfights in road rage in gas stations on Mars-Pluto lines. And I have one guy move to one. He says, what the heck's going on? I said, well, you moved on a Mars-Pluto line. He said, that makes sense. I'm getting in fights with everybody. I said, well, get off the Mars-Pluto line. And he did. Now, if you go to other lines, like you can see, this is a moon node line, totally different. Now, this is a mock, chart here. This is not anyone's birth chart. I just picked transits for today. Much different, emotional, feeling connected, like you've been there before, deja vus, all that kind of stuff. So every single chart that I look at, which is all of us, is going to have completely different energies. Like if you get on moon Jupiter lines, life is bliss. Literally, it's like bliss. Like you see, there's a moon Jupiter and a Mars Jupiter. You'd be Popeye on spinach on that. You'd feel like in bliss. See, so you really have to examine what you have in a given place in order to fully understand it. But I can tell you, it's absolutely amazing what it's like.
And so it would be different for every person where their sun, Jupiter. Okay, got it.
Every person has a different, and then not to make your eyeballs cross, but watch this. If you turn this on, these are called aspects, and the map's going to look like spaghetti. And these, wherever you see triangles, it's really good, smooth flowing energy. Wherever you see squares, that brings challenges, or you could say lessons is another way some people put it. And it's very geographically specific. And you always look at the birth chart first, and then you look at transits and progressions. So yeah, location astrology is just absolutely amazing. And I've had so many people over the years, including myself. It's absolutely stunning how accurate it is. And what's even more interesting is when you look at transits and progression. And a lot of people can't move. They may have families, or they have various different, things holding them in a given place. And the value of this is knowing what the energies are, because it's like martial arts. If you understand, even in adversity can be turned to your advantage. And this is all just energy. It's not predicting the future. It's not crystal balls and all this stuff. It's energy. And I think the more it's treated like a science of energy, the more people can take advantage of it intelligently. It's like driving a car. If you see someone coming at you, you brake, you turn, or if it's that bad, you jump, tuck, and roll, right? So it's always something we can do to mitigate adverse situations and take advantage of the good situations when we know they're there.
And for people that don't know, this is a service that you offer as well.
Yeah.
Through your company.
Yeah. I actually got into this in the mid 70s. My mother was dabbling in it. And then, she started calling my girlfriends, didn't believe in astrology at all. I said, come on, because I bought the same thing most people buy. It's there's more gravity from the doctor in the delivery room than there is from Saturn, right? Because scientists think in terms of gravity. You can't think in terms of gravity when you talk about astrology. We're in a whole different realm of influences. The hard sciences don't match that. And when I started studying it, I realized, wow, this is much more than just the hocus pocus they like to make it out to be. It's actually a real science. And I think India's type of astrology, and the West too, the Egyptians, the Chaldeans, the Greeks, many of the medieval astrology, stunning stuff, absolutely stunning. Most of your scientists today that we honor in history, like Galileo and Newton, they were all astronomers, and astronomy was astrology back then. There was no division between the two. That all came with the Age of Reason and the Industrial Revolution. That's when Yeah, it was the late 1600s, early 1700s is when the division between astronomy and astrology really happened. Astronomy and astrology were one prior to that. In fact, they were the same sacred science. And most of your, famous astronomers were astrologers. And C.S. Lewis had pointed that out as well. And of course, it was the Industrial Revolution and the Age of Reason that divided it all.
Do you know anything about how, I guess, when you come into this life as a physical person, whatever you were before, you forget that? People sometimes call it the veil of forgetting. Have you heard of this before? And if so,
God, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And here, I'm glad you brought that one up. See, there's an ancient text, and it's called the Sefer Haggadah, or it's known as the Haggadah. Now, in English, we just call that the Book of Legends. And it's what it means. And I don't think they're legends. I think they're much more real than we know. And here, I'll put up this diagram here. See, that diagram that we had up before, when the angel ties us to the physical body at first breath, there's a mark that's made. And that mark is believed to be the mark of silence. And it's right between, if I can get the computer here to work. Sorry, I didn't have that diagram up. It's right at a place called Cupid's bow. The mark of silence is that little mark that's right between the lip, the upper lip, and the nose. And many people have talked about this. It's right between Cupid's bow, which is the upper part of the lip, and where the nose is. That mark is said to make us forget. And what's interesting is this gets into a psychological model, which I love. You can see here, this big, thick dashed line is the division here between what modern psychology might call the conscious mind below here and the so-called subconscious mind above. But a much better metaphor would be, this is what I like to call the present personality or the lower conscious mind. And this big, thick dashed line is that mark of silence that blocks us. In fact, many ancient documents say if we could see, not with our eyes, but with our spiritual sight fully, we would see all the spirits and the angels, the disincarnate souls, and the elementals that are around us in the astral world. And most of us could not live our lives the way we are now. We're completely blocked from that world for the most part. Many psychics and intuitives can poke their head up there. But notice that's Neptune. It's the crescent of the moon over the cross that goes through the veil. And this gets into a lot of interesting stuff about our modern world. When we were spanked on the rear end, we were really unable to see, talk, or anything else. We were literally incarcerated into these bodies. And I do say incarcerated because the soul is blocked. And that, again, is this big, thick dashed line. So everything we know, Pink Floyd had a great album about this called Dark Side of the Moon. Everything we know is literally what we've learned in this lifetime. Look at IQ tests. Look at all of the things that modern society uses. It's all what we've learned from our parents, our friends, our schools, our interactions with everyone, and they leave an indelible impression upon us. But it's not us. The Hebrews and the Aramaic language, the Chaldeans, said it was something called the nephesh. Now, that's a strange word in Aramaic that actually means the lower conscious mind. It's not us. It's the keyboard, the mouse, and the screen that we kind of use to interact with this physical world. Or if you like, the steering wheel, the gas pedal, and the brakes, whatever analogy you want to use. We're all literally controlling these miraculous bodies through our so-called brain, but I think it's the spirit, psyche, and soul, into this lower realm and the five senses. But it's not us. It's the interface that we've developed. Notice just above that is the planet Saturn. Every mystery school taught that, not every, but many of them taught that literally Saturn is the end of what we call space and time. And notice Saturn's glyph is the cross over the crescent of the moon, previously concretized energies that we had stored connected to the upper divisions of the soul. So this is why many astrologers will tell you, and in fact, Vedic and Naadi astrology talk about how Saturn is the planet of karma. It's what the soul is attached to. And I always say, forget Trinity, Neo, and Morpheus. This is truly the matrix of what the lower purpose of these incarnations are about. And what's fascinating is notice just above here, this is the wisdom of the upper portion of the soul to the upper divinity of the soul. So we are blocked from that for the most part. This is the stuff everyone talks about. Intuition, my gut feeling, right? My common sense, my upper self, all these phrases we use that something's telling us, a message that is above the so-called conscious learned mind, because the lower conscious mind is actually very dangerous. It's very programmable. And you can prove this. I mean, you take people who are raised in cults or certain, people are raised in certain religions or certain societies to hate other people. We're seeing this right now in the world. This is ingrained. This is what these people believe. We see this in cults all the time, where if you indoctrinate someone into a certain belief system, that becomes their reality. But the interesting thing is there's certain people it doesn't work on. Well, why? Maybe that soul's more advanced. How many times have we heard, well, I was raised in this culture to do this or do that, and then they become the black sheep and they separate and they go their own way. And so the upper intuition on certain souls is much more connected. These are the more advanced, older souls. The interesting thing is we need to be aware. It's like the news, the mind control news. I think one of the most successful HBO programs, most people would agree with me, was when George Carlin came out with The American Dream. If you remember that on HBO, if anybody hasn't seen that, you got to watch it. He that's where he broke the phrase, forget the politicians, you have owners, right? And he was talking about how society is so cruel to one another and how this greed factor and money factor is always coming in and suppressing the common average person. And again, this is what the founding fathers of this country sought to push back against with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, right? Basic human freedoms. We all have a right to be free, and we all have a right to be individual, no matter what our race, no matter what our creed, beliefs, etc. How fat, tall, small, or skinny you are, or whatever. Doesn't matter. So that's why this country was founded on really sacred principles that are actually exceedingly divine. And this fits into this whole thing too, because we see nothing but manipulation in the lower worlds for the most part. I mean, everybody's trying to sell you something. Everybody's trying to convince you something and make us buy into some reality system of theirs. And then you have the good people who just want to see freedom for everybody, you see. So this is really, I really say the earth is the soul cauldron where we all come to experience the life of good and evil and all points in between, and everyone's on a different track commensurate with the soul. They actually say the guardian angel ties us into that body at a very special time, commensurate with the journey of that specific soul. So there's something much more divine here going on than just, good and evil. There's actually a very divine purpose, I think, to life.
Is there anything in your studies that talks about pre-birth planning?
Yeah, well, it's not my studies. That's actually covered quite a bit in some of the ancient doctrines that, prenatal birth charts. The Egyptians looked at the time of conception, which is prenatal. But going into that whole genre, now you enter the world of karma. See, in Vedic and Naadi astrology, karma is this white stuff substance that's believed to be attached to the soul. And I think one of the most profound documents on that that's been written, that's an English translation, is this one right here. It's known as the Shar Hagilgam or Shar Hagilgam. This is the text. This text has been translated out of Aramaic and Hebrew into the English, and it talks about that same structural system that we were looking at a moment ago, which is the lower conscious mind, which is called nefesh, the ruach, which is the spirit, and then the neshama, which is the karma that is attached to each soul. And the pre-life, or you could say past lives is probably a better way to say it, are shown in the Vedic astrology by the yogas and planetary placements within the chart. So in other words, you're not just looking at astrology anymore. The sun becomes the father. The moon becomes the mother. The siblings become either Mercury or Venus, whether they're males or females, and Mars. Your path of life and purpose is depicted by Saturn. And the breath of life on the soul is Jupiter. It's very interesting. And many Christians who have been in the Christian religion may recognize in the Lord's Prayer, they end it with, "Thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen." Now, if you went into the Catholicism way, it's "Thine is the kingdom, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost." But the ancient, that's actually, believe it or not, taken from a very ancient Aramaic prayer that predates Christianity. Thine is means the gift of, the kingdom means the gift of life to creation. When people touch the forehead, thine is the gift of life, and then the kingdom is the earth. It's the 4 points: sunrise, noon, sunset, and midnight, and the 4 archangels of creation. The power is Mars and Saturn, and the glory is Jupiter and Venus. And people say amen at the heart chakra. That's actually a very ancient prayer that was added to Christianity much later. So this is very, very interesting stuff.
Do you know anything about the esoteric teachings of Jesus that might not have made it into the mainstream Bible?
Yeah, there's a lot. I can't say I know everything about it for sure, but I actually have a client of mine who said that the missing years of Christ could have possibly been in India. And there may be a lot more truth to that from what I've seen than meets the eye. And one of my favorite books to recommend is a book called The Magus of Strovolos. I've mentioned this book a lot on my podcasts. The Magus of Strovolos is about a mystic who lived on the island of Cyprus. And one of my favorite books to recommend to people who are in following the Christian path, because it's extremely into the esoteric and spiritual secrets that I think we're taught. And one thing's for sure, Rome is clearly guilty of harboring and hiding a lot of information. You look at the text, the Book of Enoch, you look at the books of Thomas, you look at the books of the Nag Hammadi library, the Dead Sea Scrolls, we could go on and on and on, that have been hidden or not allowed to be put into anything modern. And this was done by the bearded men murdering each other for the first few hundred years of the formation of Christianity. And I find the same thing happens in many religions where there's not agreement in different sects of religions. I mean, you see the same thing in various different religions. I mean, we look at the same thing in Hinduism and Buddhism. They broke off because of that. We see the same thing in Tibet. We see the same thing, multiple factions of Christianity. There's also multiple factions of Judaism. You have the Hasidics, you have the Stoics, you have the Orthodox, all these different divisions. And that's because people always tend to dogmatize the original truths. And it's really a sad thing when that happens. People go to colleges, they get all these degrees studying religions, and even then they're only able to study what's been spoon-fed to them through the curriculums. And I enjoy not being bound by these, restrictions to study things. One man that I got a chance to meet in the 80s was Manly P. Hall, and you may have heard of him. He was the creator of the Philosophical Research Center over on Franklin, over by Griffith Park in Los Angeles. And he was bequeathed a lot of information by secret societies in the early 1900s. And of course, he then later wrote the book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages. It's an amazing book. But Secret Teachings of All Ages gets into many doctrines that were not included in modern, not only Christianity, but many other religions. And secret societies have been woven in and out of the fabric of society since the beginning of time. And, you have, again, the Kabbalah has been kind of a pop term that's really become manifest over the last 25, 30 years. But prior to that, it was just ancient sacred wisdom. And, that goes all the way back to Hermetic philosophies and Egyptian and Chaldean. And there's so many different things that we could talk about forever. It's an endless subject. And it's all really down to the divinity of creation and what is this place? And I love to quote some of the we did a good podcast on my YouTube channel about the soul, and we mentioned a lot of these books that support that the religions haven't been forthcoming in some ways about the journey of the soul, and it's kind of a shame, actually.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I think got kicked out of Christianity when they canonized the Bible, things like reincarnation and stuff like that. That was well accepted in some of these Jewish traditions, the Essenes and things like that.
I think ancient Christianity had it too. The doctrines of reincarnation were thrown out somewhere between the 1st and the 3rd century. No question about it. And they were in original Christianity. There's no question about it. And, you take, it's even mentioned in the Bible, Enoch, there's some people who believe that, there's reincarnations of these great saints keep coming back. And there's many different theories that, Christ could have been Enoch. Very interesting stuff. So if you read the books of Enoch, quite interesting stuff. The books of Thomas and the lost books of, there's so many books I could quote. There was just a synagogue discovered in Egypt that was almost completely untouched for over 20, I think it was 2,000 or 2,300 years. I mean, literally, they just blew the dust off of everything, and it was all sitting there. And profound things are coming out of that. And again, we get smatterings of things like the Dead Sea Scrolls, the books of Thomas, the Nag Hammadi Library. It goes on and on. In secret societies, speaking of Manly P. Hall, he was a 33-degree Mason. And a lot of people have made the Masons out to be, they're devil worshipers or this and that. Anyone who wants to read the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights, those were all put together by very high-level Masons. So whatever offshoots Masonry may have gotten into in the last couple hundred years, that's something I can't speak to.
Yeah, it's very possible that Freemasonry has been infiltrated. It might have started off good and then it just went bad. So
that happens to everything. It happens to every religion. It happens to every secret society. And it can happen to people too. The demonic spirits love nothing better than to corrupt us any way they can. They hate humanity. In fact, I think if it wasn't for the upper divine angels, I don't think we'd be drawing breath for a nanosecond. They hate humanity because they're actually incarcerated to facilitate creation against their will. And the proof of that might be, there's some very ancient texts that support this. Everything starts out at a beginning, a seed, creation, an embryo, a baby, whatever you want to say, a little animal, whatever, a plant, and it grows. Then it comes to maturity and fruition. Then it starts to decline and decay and total decay. and then it rejuvenates. Well, it's known that the evil spirits are actually involved and forced to be involved in that entire process, and they hate it. And that's why decay is happening. They actually say Belial is the Lord of Flies, Beelzebub. And these are all angels that are incarcerated beneath the evil spirits. They're evil angels, or you could say spirits. They tend to call them demonic spirits. But this is very interesting stuff. When you get into some of the ancient documents, like the Goetic documents, you get into things like particularly, see, the Goetia was the 72 angels of King Solomon, which is also in the Bible under Exodus. All of this stuff got neutered in the translations, particularly the Vulgate translations and into the translations that happened under King James. You can't take a cryptographic coded language like Aramaic, Hebrew, and some of the Greek was, and stuff it into a language and neuter all the cryptology that's in it. And this is very, very interesting stuff because, again, this is far beyond anything we could present here. And not that I'm, able to ever give any full complete, but I'll show you something here in a second here. I'll share the screen. Give me a minute here. Let me see if I can get this up. Here we go. Here's some cool stuff. What cryptology really is, it is, say, like right over here, you can see it's a little bit abstract to relate to this on this page, but it'll suffice to show us. See, what a cipher is it's a code. Just like in the military, they have ciphers and codes that they use to communicate things so the enemy won't discover it. Well, in the Bible, if you take its original status, which was Aramaic, Hebrew, and Greek, and Coptic, and all that, which different versions were written in, there, particularly the Aramaic and the Hebrew, there was codes called Zirif. Zirif is a strange word, and Gematria is another one. There's also Akbeker and Tamira. These are all various different types of numerology that the original scripture was encoded in. And, a lot of people who study the ancient Old text or Testament will know something in Judaism is called the Torah. And that is profound stuff. So is the Psalms. The Psalms, which really took a hit too, they were smacked in the middle of the Bible. Well, the original meaning of the Psalms was called Tehillim, Theillm. And Tehillim means the sacred messages of the Psalms. And there's actually a book called the Shemush Tehillim, which has codes and angels that are encrypted in many of the verses that people read in the Psalms. And of course, the Psalms have gotten a lot of attention over the last couple thousand years, and rightly so. Very sacred stuff. But if you could see the original stuff in the Shemush Tehillim, it's stunning. It's stunning, the codes that are contained in that. And see, these are all tables that the scriptures could be passed through. And this is stuff, there's angels, spirits, and intelligences in every single planet. There's hierarchies. This is very, very interesting stuff. And you can see, here's a good example. These are what we call sigils, that you literally trace the name of the angel out on these angelic squares, and you will get a representation of the angel's name. These symbols here are actually names of angels, spirits, and intelligences that are, you could say, embedded within the planetary hierarchy. See, these sigils, or you could say shapes, are traced by taking the name of the angel, the spirit, and the intelligent, and that's where you would trace the letters, and you'll end up with all these symbols. This is stuff that the church sought to bury completely. And sadly enough, they also buried the secrets that are in the Psalms and the scriptures. See? Here's Benjamin Franklin. Here, let me just come back here. Benjamin Franklin, who everyone knows is one of the founding fathers of this country and gave a lot to this country. He was very much into what we call double acrostics and various types of squares that were many people refer to them as magical squares. But yeah, the sacred magic of these angelic forces are all over the ancient stuff. And the modern religions have been sorely deprived of it. And of course, the modern religions didn't want to deal with this. And Rome just made an executive decision, and we're not going to explain this stuff to people. We don't want them to know about it. You're all sinners and you're all going to hell. And that's it. So anyways, the amount of lore on this is absolutely stunning if you get into the ancient worlds. See, and they knew there are angels, spirits, and intelligences that rule everything. You could see the nature spirits known as the gnomes. Every culture of the world has talked about earth spirits. They're in the mountains. They're, we hear about the lore in Ireland and all this stuff. That we also hear much about the sylphs and the fairies. It's not just a Peter Pan legend. The sylphs and the fairy are believed to rule the winds in the air. The salamanders rule kinetics and fire. And of course, the undines rule the water. So there's, again, the earth, air, fire, and water spirits. And again, science laughs at this stuff. And yet, quantum physicists are scratching their heads going, something like this might be really plausible because it acts very intelligently and repeatable. Very interesting stuff. And they often say natural disasters happen because certain karmic energies are releasing upon the earth. And people might get upset and say, well, geez, I just lost someone in a tornado or whatever, and that's horrible. My heart goes out to them, or a flood, or some hurricane, or something else. But it's interesting how violent these forces are. And, our meteorologists can explain it away with pressures and all that, which is true. And it does match up with the science. But it's very interesting how sneak waves will take someone away, or we find the freak energies of nature tend to come through in very mysterious ways. And I think thing I like the most about all this stuff is the more we play with nature, with our chemtrails, our weather manipulation, and on, sooner or later, it seems like nature and God gets ticked off and causes some real changes, very powerful stuff.
Yeah, this is really interesting. I can't wait to read these books. I was already making a book list based off of some of the other podcasts that you did. But as time permits, I'd love to dive into this stuff.
It's a big puzzle. Yeah.
Yeah, if the internet permits, I'd like to try to end this on as an optimistic note as possible. So you mentioned that the Pluto return doesn't have to be negative. It can be this phoenix rising from the ashes kind of metaphor. Do you have any examples of that, or anything else that you might want to talk about in relation to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, look back through history. All your great empires, creation and humanity always marched forward. We always march on. And there's too many souls here having physical experiences, in my opinion, to ever end the world. We always hear, the world's going to end. I remember in the 70s, I was marched into a theater in the late great planet Earth. The world was going to end. We weren't going to live past 1985, right? Axis tips, 1,000-mile-an-hour wind. None of it's ever happened. Not that we don't get wars and disasters and calamities, but the world keeps marching on. I'm with George Carlin. The world is like a big dog and we're the fleas. So I'm more worried about us than the world ultimately. And I think this climate change, Roos, is kind of that. I think they're using this right now to gain more manipulation. I think the sun is going through some very powerful magnetic changes. And, again, I don't think it's SUVs and farting cows that are causing the climate change. I think we're in a grand solar minimum. That's what a lot of scientists, the real scientists, are saying. And it's also what's supported in the astrology as well, that, the world's not going to end. It's going to keep going on. There's too many souls here playing out their journey. There's a lot of ancient texts that speak about how literally there is an infinite number of souls, like rain falling from the heavens, that will pass through the earth and they talk about the great years. They say it takes somewhere around 25,700 something years for the solar system to go around the central sun. And there's all kinds of lore about this, but it's basically the lore we've been hearing. How many 50 years? I've been hearing that we have entered the Aquarian age ever since the early 60s. I've been hearing this. And I can tell you that I don't think we're there. I think we're going to get there in a couple of hundred years from now, quite possibly, if the mathematics are right. No one knows. I don't claim to know. But I think we have to look at ourselves as spiritual beings having a physical experience. And I really believe that somewhere close to when the Hebrew calendar hits 6,000, which is about 216 years from now, is when we might actually see this golden age start to begin. The yugas in the Vedic astrology say the same thing, that we've been in a dark rift of a Kali Yuga subperiod. There's all kinds of theories about this, but it's quite possible we will be coming out of an age of darkness, material darkness, into an age of much more spiritual enlightenment in the next couple of hundred years. And no matter what happens, we're all really just spiritual. And I think the angel tumultuous boat ride here this next couple of years, but it shows in 2025 the progressions may just bring us out of this in a much more positive way. That's what I get.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it seems, maybe it's just the internet, but it seems like people are waking up to things kind of like what we're talking about now. And they're sort of, well, if you watch the news, you wouldn't believe this, but it seems like people are rejecting a lot of the narratives that are being forced, onto us, whether it's forever wars or, new disasters or crises. So I think there's something going on there. I don't know if it's the age Aquarius or if it's, some other kind of thing that's going on, but I think that the collective of humanity seems to be evolving in a positive trajectory. And at the same time that these evil forces are making themselves more known, almost like they're equally rising in power or something like that. So yeah, I don't know. I'm hopeful, but I think we're going to have some turbulence, just like you mentioned.
Yeah. But I think we'll get through it. I really do. And, I think the biggest thing is fear, because we all have fear. And, even if we rationalize away fear, we all still have fear. We all have fear of loss, fear of this, fear of that. But the more we realize and stay centered and realize that we're not these physical bodies and we're not all that we've learned, that we're really spiritual sojourners having a physical experience. And I think that's what the religions have all tried to instill. I think in some ways they did it, in some ways they sorely failed. And that is that no matter what your faith and belief is, there's something very divine here going on. Creation itself is exceedingly divine. AI will never be what we are, or any living sentient being, because it's programmed. It's a machine, and we aren't. I mean, we pick up a glass of water because we're thirsty. AI will do it to look human because it was programmed to act human or learn to be human. So AI is very dangerous, but it's also a blessing in disguise because it's making humanity recognize itself more. And all this technology is actually exposing us to so much more knowledge than we ever got before. I mean, God, when I was a little kid, it was black and white TV with the rabbit ears, and I could tell you, life has changed so much just in my lifetime. I talked to my grandmother, who literally came from, the early 1900s, 1907, and literally saw 2 world wars, the Depression, all this growth, and of course, people landing on the moon. And then where we're at now, she died in 2009 at 102 years old. And stunning what her life has saw. Can you imagine what our lives are going to see? I mean, we are now in a new era ever since 2020. And what I mean by that is we had a 240-year Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in a very special condition. It was in the tropical sign of Aquarius. That's why a lot of astrologers say we're in Aquarius. We're not. We had a conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius, in my opinion, at least. And what that did is that's ushering in a high-tech revolution like we've never seen before. A lot of the secrets that have been hidden this last century are going to start to roll out over the next 20, 30 years. And long term, I have a very positive viewpoint because I think evil can never win because evil is suppressed by creation itself. It's forced to be a part of it. And it's a dynamic that's going on right now. And I think it has a lot to do with the purification, rectification of souls, where the world's at right now, which is interesting stuff. Because when you think about that, again, we are just spiritual beings tied into these bodies. And what the religions have done, in my opinion, has kind of, at least the modern versions, have been tricked into not exposing the secrets that have been suppressed to the degree that the original people who had access to this knowledge has been suppressed. And all of us are waking up to that. We all have our intuition, our higher selves, the wisdom. On that diagram that I showed before, we all have an intuitive sense of what's going on. And the more we get in touch with that, and we get in touch with that by not being in a place of fear, but a place of awareness, and then we start to connect with the upper portions of the soul, which is the most important thing we can all ever do. Because I promise you, every single one of us will exit these physical bodies known as death. We're all going to do it in a different way, clearly. But being in fear of that and living in fear is what paralyzes us. The more we just go forward knowing that, hey, watch the movie Ghost sometime. I think it's a lot like that. I thought that was a pretty accurate depiction in some ways of what it's like. And the psychiatrists, the psychologists, and some of the books I mentioned on my website absolutely affirm that. And consciousness and awareness to that when we exit the body, whenever we all do, is so critical. So if we become more aware of who we truly are, the more we're going to raise our vibration and connect to the upper portions of ourselves. No question about that.
I agree 100%. So if people want to reach out to you and get in touch, what's the best way to do that?
The best way is at my website, jeff@jeffharmon.com. You just email in and we'll definitely get right back to you. So, that's the best way for readings and such. And also check out my YouTube channel, which is Jeff Harmon Astrologer or Jeff Harmon Vedic Astrologer. Either one gets you in. There's a lot of great stuff on there you can watch and check out.
All right, Jeff, thanks for coming on.
You are so welcome, my friend, and good luck to you. Stay
Thank you,
strong. We'll get through all this.